Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the New Mainstream podcast,
where we explore the impact of multicultural consumers on marketing and media.
I'm your host, Mario Carrasco, and co-founder of Think Now. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the New Mainstream podcast, where we explore the intersections of culture, creativity, and identity. Today, excited to be joined by Kimberly Ayers-Sharif, Executive Vice President of Strategy for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Penguin Random House. Kimberly has an extensive background in arts, law, D&I initiatives across various sectors. Kimberly, pleasure to have you with us today.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me to join you.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to our conversation. You're, I believe, one of the first guests coming from a publishing background, and something close to my heart as a literature major. So excited to chat with you. We had a conversation prior to the podcast, and you shared a little bit about your journey, and I think you've had a pretty incredible journey. Some of the most respected institutions in arts, media. One of my favorite parts is learning more about how people got to where they are. Would love to hear more about your journey. How did you end up at Penguin Random House?
Yeah, very, very windy path, which I think are sometimes the best ones.
Agreed.
I will just start by saying that I think that I'll describe myself as a strategist and an artist in a lawyer's body, right? Which will make for a windy path.
Yeah.
But I really have been blessed to have a career that's allowed my authentic qualities to come out, right? And the things that I really love the most. And so I just stayed true to that. So even as a lawyer, I just like to observe things. And I will tell you, 9 times out of 10, I was subject to these, I'll call them cases of, mistaken identity, I guess is a good way to say it, because no one ever assumed that I was a lawyer. One anecdote is me walking down the hall trying to get to this meeting with a partner, and someone handed me some mail. Right?
Wow.
And the indication was I was to take the mail to be mailed, to the mail. And there's nothing wrong with that role in a law firm. Absolutely. But to presuppose that people who look a certain way are only, relegated to doing particular roles is, it's not great culture-wise. So that was on my radar. And I started to speak about it even as a very young associate. I started to relay stories like this to some of the partners that I work with who didn't have any visibility into that at all within their culture. And once they knew, they became very committed to making sure that those kinds of things didn't happen. So then I ended up, I had a wonderful, wonderful mentor, and that's a key part of my story is the relationships that I built, who left the firm but kept me on his radar. So when he started his own firm, he said, look, I would love for you to be my first associate as soon as I can afford to pay you, kind of thing. And that's exactly what he did. He got the firm, I should say, got their first big client, and it was Black Entertainment Television. And so he brought me on board. I was essentially seconded to BET, and being there was literally being in the midst of a DEI, or what we now call DEI, dream, right? It was a place where we were building a platform for artists who didn't otherwise have this access to center stage. What a dream. It was amazing. And even though we were doing this, with regard to a certain, kind of type of artist at the time, right, who needed this access, I feel like I learned the building blocks for access, for creating access, particularly in the creative realm. So I'm just so grateful for that time. I'm grateful for the colleagues that I was able to meet and work with and learn from. Just an amazing part of my formative years as a professional. But I got to a point where I didn't feel as though the content was always completely aligned with my values. I was starting a family, all these different things. And I started thinking to myself, what do I want for my children? What do I want to support putting into the world? And certainly there were many things at BET that I would love for my kids to kind of consume. But I also felt like there were other parts of the arts that really meant a lot to me. So when I saw this job at Lincoln Center, I didn't think I had the proper number of years experience, all these different things. You try to check every box. But my husband was really instrumental in saying, just go for it. You have this amazing job at BET. The worst Lincoln Center can say is no. And then guess what? You still have this great job. You know what? He's right. So I applied, and my boss at the time said, I didn't know what I was looking for until I saw your resume, which was a lesson to me, to follow your gut, right? And just go for it. Bottom line, just go for it. And so there, again, I just looked around and I was curious and I asked questions and I talked to people and I made friends. And I learned that, more access to this beautiful, amazing content that Lincoln Center was putting into the world was pretty much the best thing that Lincoln Center could do for itself and for its audiences. And so in the midst of being deputy general counsel there, where I was lawyering, I also started to talk to all of my colleagues, including the president at the time of Lincoln Center, to say, let's work on access, right? And in doing so, we also need to look at who's inside our organization. Because in order for us to authentically connect with a wider and wider set of audiences, it's nice to have those voices inside, answering questions, bringing up ideas, thinking of strategies. And so I started to work on DEI, and I'm using air quotes here, at the time, because we weren't calling it that there. But that's exactly what it was. And that was thrilling to me. Again, to be able to open up this world of beauty, of art, of innovation to more and more people, just really, really made my heart sing. And so ultimately, I decided to leave the lawyering part of Lincoln Center, but I went immediately back. They hired me back as a consultant literally the next day. I changed my title, and I started to work on two really big initiatives that I had helped, colleagues kind of call together while I was there. One was a diversity fellowship program that was going to help bring more diverse fellows into our programming professionals midst. And then also to work on a program for children and families so that we could start to get more diversity in that realm, which was then the pipeline for audiences of the future, which, I don't know, both were just really, really important to me. And I had small kids at the time, so that was really cool too. From there, I had built these relationships at Lincoln Center. I also worked, in addition to being a lawyer, I worked in this little think tank, this internal think tank that the president had formed. He would bring in business school students for the summer, and one of them each year would be chosen to, a full-time job to work in this think tank. And he asked me if I wanted to join them, and I said, you don't have to ask me twice. So I worked on a lot of, these DEI initiatives I was able to work on in that context. And the leader of that group at Lincoln Center ultimately became the executive director at American Ballet Theater. And so when she joined, she said, I need my thought partner back. Would you come over to ABT and help me just figure out this thing, how she was going to approach the role, but also what potential was locked inside of this, 75-year-old organization at the time for her to start to bring out to the forefront. And so there, I really feel like that was the first time as a professional that I could fully live into this, artist, strategist, lawyer thing that I had inside me, because I kind of had full reign to just do what I wanted, right? And throw out ideas. Not that everything I threw out was pitch perfect and everyone wanted to do it, but I had a voice where I could, say things, test things. I love a pilot. And this was a perfect breeding ground for that. And so there I was able to build ABT RISE, which stands for Representation and Inclusion Sustained Excellence. And so I would say that was the most high profile DEI program that I was able to build that was actually labeled DEI, right? Truly and, specifically. So during my time there, I did that work. I built the legal department. I helped, kind of strengthen and expand HR. I was a strategist, right, at the right hand of both the artistic and executive directors. And so one of the things that I got to do was help to negotiate an 8-book children's book deal with the Random House Children's Books. And so that was the start of this really wonderful and rich relationship between ABT and then, ultimately Penguin Random House, right? Because Random House Children's Books is is a division, I should say, of my current company, Penguin Random House. That's how I learned about this role. I kind of dismissed it at first, but it stuck in my mind, just the way that they had described the role. Um, Instead of having line items describing the duties, it had categories that they wanted the professional to fall into. So, for instance, champion and influencer, um, uh, pragmatic disruptor, you know, data driven, all these different things. And I was like, wow, this is it. You've just a wonderful way of describing a role, particularly in this realm. And so I remembered it 6 months later, applied, got the job, and I'm just so thrilled and grateful to be sitting in this position and working with my amazing colleagues at Penguin Random House for the past 3 years now.
That's incredible, and I mean, so many great insights from your journey that I gathered. I mean, one, the importance of mentors and mentorship. It sounded like that was critical for you, and I truly believe in terms of equity and inclusion, mentorship is such a big part of it, and I think you're an example of that, which is amazing. Two, just your curiosity, right? I mean, even though you were at a role, let's say legal focus early on in your career, you were interested in other things, and I think that's so important too, right? Just to follow your passion, even if it's not necessarily in your lane. I mean, you wouldn't be where you're at if you had just stuck to your job description, right?
That's
Which is
right.
pretty incredible.
That's
And you
right.
you eventually just followed your path completely out of law, although I know you're using it now, kind of full circle, but that's pretty amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, like I said, I'm very grateful. Um, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so let's dive in a little bit more about. So now you're at Penguin Random House, and um, I know we had a conversation prior. You're shaping strategy for diversity, equity, and inclusion, but you have touch points in multiple departments, from creative to HR. Um, yeah, tell us more about your role just in general. So now, what aspects of the business are you involved in?
Yeah, that was part of the appeal for this role was that Penguin Random House understood and has understood for a very long time that this work is applicable to every single aspect of what they do when it comes to the books that they publish. So I have a purview that includes looking internally, right? So at culture, our workforce, our workplace, but also externally, how we market, how we connect with our authors and our audiences, and frankly, sometimes what we actually publish, what we put out into the world. So it's really a crucial part of something that I've used as the basis for my approach to this work, whether named or unnamed, all along, which is something I call DEI in the DNA. Right? To me, this work is simply good business practice. We should be thinking about the things that are, most often labeled as DEI all the time. in connection with every business decision that we make. That's how I feel about it. And I think that that's what really shapes and can make a culture that is, not only strong, right, in terms of the business output, but also comfortable, right, and welcoming to as many different types of people as possible, which then bolsters that ability to reach wider and wider sets of audiences, and also understand trends, right? What's coming next? Who do you need to speak to about what, right? In order to maintain your efficacy. So, yeah, I really feel like that's the basis of my approach. And then, of course, there are, technical aspects of it that have driven what I've done with my colleagues, right, so far in these 3 years.
And is your strategy, because you have purview into such different departments, and I think you answered the question with the phrase DEI and the DNA, but is it an overall strategy that you're implementing across different departments, or do you have specific strategies for each department in terms and how it relates to DE and I?
Yeah, so we have a corporate DEI strategy, which is borne out in what we've called DEI strategic plans. And so when I started, we strategic planned for the period between 2022 to 2024. And so midway through this year, it's actually just been within the past, 4 weeks or so, we did a recap of what we have achieved over that last 2 year period. And then we rolled out a new plan, a new DEI strategic plan for 2024 to 2026. There, we have some very, kind of overarching themes that will touch every department, every team, every individual in a way within Penguin Random House. From that, depending on the goals, right, that are inside each one of these kind of topical areas that we've defined in our DEI strategy, there are some things that can specifically manifest as specific strategy for a specific team. But then there are other things that just generally guide the way that we do things at Penguin Random House. And so I think the question is both. you know, there are times when things are not spelled out for teams by us at a corporate level, but what we spelled out can help people to develop a strategy that's very specific. Um, I really like to make it clear that my team as a corporate going concern can't possibly know exactly what each one of our divisions and teams and departments need. And so we are partners, right? And in some case, I hope we provide guidance to help people then, develop these more specific strategies that can be executed in a way that's more curated and speaks specifically to the needs of whatever part of our company is asking and trying to develop this aspect of what they do.
Yeah, and I think that's a great approach. I mean, where instead of a top-down D and I, it's integrating and knowing that here's kind of high-level strategy and enabling people in charge of each of the departments to interpret and adapt based on their specific departmental needs, right?
Exactly. That's exactly it. But we don't leave people out there. We are constantly connected and available so that, we can just partner with people and collaborate with people and help them to just crystallize if they need it.
Yeah. And so a question, I guess, in that vein, so people reaching out to you, you're asking for advice, maybe or even crafting strategy, like how does your legal expertise help in that? I mean, or does it? I mean,
It's interesting.
do
Yeah.
you rely on that? Like, I would love to know how, now flash forward, you're not necessarily in a lawyer position, like you had
Right.
mentioned early on in your career, but Are you using your legal background in this new role with D&I?
Absolutely. And I'll say it's interesting because I categorize this role as really the first time in my career that I've been a single subject matter professional,
Mhm.
which sounds crazy because of what I just described, which is like, oh, it's internal, it's external, it's this, it's that, it spans across the
Right.
entire company. Right? But I'm thinking about the same series of issues in each one of those contexts. Whereas before, I was like legal, HR, strategy, DEI, all these different things. And so it felt like it was multiple areas. Whereas now it's kind of doing more of a deep dive, right, in this one area across the spectrum. Um, so that said, it's fascinating for me to reflect on the ways that I really am using my legal training and approach in this single subject matter role that is not, specifically legal. So I will say things like an analytical approach, right? I mean, this is highly personal, emotional, kind of empathic work, but layering over the analysis or the kind of approach, right, that I would take to analysis in these other realms to this work, I think is really, really helpful, right? Of course, numbers speak volumes, but then considering real life outcomes and manifestations is crucial as well. So if you can kind of analyze things in a way that takes into account all those different aspects of it, I think that helps people to grasp it and it helps people to get behind it. So I certainly use that analytical approach every day, I would say. Detail orientation, huge. Because again, it's kind of amorphous at times, right? And then you layer that personal emotional over it. And then you also put into the mix the fact that some of it can be unfamiliar territory for people. So being very detail oriented in the way that you navigate it and communicate it, I think can increase, the effectiveness of the work too. Um, and then the last thing I'd probably say is that ability to kind of decipher and make connections between DEI aspects and then business outcomes. Because as a lawyer, you always find yourself doing that with legal aspects and business outcomes, right? And I just use the same approach, right? It's a different ball of wax in a way, but the same way. When I was a lawyer, going into a situation, particularly in the creative realm, where the creativity remains paramount, but people understand that like you have to consider the legal aspects. You don't want to get yourself in trouble, and so I found myself always thinking of how we can marry the two and not let either one detract from the other. And so I still do that today, right? We're marrying these concepts, but obviously, like any business needs to have good business outcomes in order to stay afloat. So you have to keep that front of mind.
Yeah, and you touched on my next question about creative and bridging that gap, right?
Yeah.
And the past two companies you've been at have been focused on the arts, the American Ballet Theater, now Penguin Random House, and I'm curious, like, what are unique challenges and opportunities that the arts sector present when it comes to diversity and inclusion?
Yeah. Um, I'll start with challenges because I like to get those out of the way and then move on to the fun, uplifting stuff. But one really interesting parallel that I found, particularly between ballet and publishing, is the importance of history.
Mm,
There's a lot of through lines that come from hundreds of years, right, of content and outputs, right, in these creative realms. And they are very important, right? It's always good to know from whence you came, and particularly with ballet, literally every day when dancers go into their classes, they're doing movements, right, and following routines that were created, again, like centuries ago, but still inform what dancers of today do so well. Um, and so, similar with publishing, right? There's some things about it that are die hard, right? Like they're going to be there regardless. And so when you think about starting from there and then trying to innovate in ways that sometimes call to question some of the basic tenets, right, from way back when, there can be a bit of a struggle. I don't think it's a bad struggle, though. That's the thing. I think that it actually makes you stronger and makes you more innovative. And so, I like to kind of confront them, right? Be transparent about the presence and, the necessity of some of this history, but also, you know, raise people's awareness, right, to the ways that we can actually think innovatively using that platform as our starting point. And that maybe even using that platform as a starting point is going to make us that much more innovative and that much more inclusive and that much more diverse in our thinking. Um, so I would say, history, right, or historical significance is huge. But then, if I look at where I came from in the arts, particularly the nonprofit arts, limited funding and staffing is a big deal, particularly when you're talking about something like diversity, equity, and inclusion. I hope one day that we actually do get to DEI and the DNA, and people don't speak of it as this separate endeavor, and it really is integrated into the fabric. And I think then some of the effects of those limitations will fall away. But for the time being, I think that becomes, a potential hurdle to jump in that realm. Um, so I'd say those are probably the two biggest, um, you know, challenges, but also motivating factors. I'll put them that
Yeah.
way. I'm a consummate optimist that I've seen really, really starkly, right, in at least
Yeah.
publishing ballet for sure.
And how about opportunities? I mean, what are I mean, I think we both are a fan of the arts, and obviously, the impact you have. I mean, I'd like to know, yeah, how do you see some of the opportunities for diversity, specifically at Penguin Random House, to affect positive, one, change in general, I think, in culture, but two, from a business outcome perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I spoke earlier about feeling grateful to be with the colleagues that I have at Penguin Random House. And so I will say that the mindset that accompanies the, artistic elements of publishing, ballet, etc., this is fertile ground for diversity, equity, and inclusion,
Hmm.
right? The creative mind, I think, naturally understands the value of diversity, right? And I'm talking diversity in the most broad sense possible. And that's what I always do when I say diversity. I don't mean, just a few categories that may be lightning rod topics, right, in our country or in our world. Every single aspect of us as humans and the different things that we bring as humans to each table. That's what I'm talking about. And so the respect for that and the reverence for that is inherent in the creative realm is just, it's amazing, right? It's constant fuel for this work. And so I try to tap into that at every turn, right? Even just our mission at Penguin Random House, which is to create books for everyone. That's a DEI practitioner's dream.
Uh,
My dream, you know.
yeah, I love that. I mean, and I just, yeah, realize the fountain of inspiration that you have for your role in terms of the creativity. That is pretty amazing to think about.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
lie.
So, well, looking ahead, how do you see the role of D and I evolving in creative industries like publishing. Like, do you see any trends or changes that you anticipate will start to shape the future of inclusion in these spaces? I know you alluded to one already, where you hope that D and I and DNA is just common practice.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you see any other trends that like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I've been thinking about a few different things. One is the connection between like wellness becoming more a part of corporate concerns and DEI, right? I think the more you can make your culture inclusive, um, the higher the wellness factor is for your workforce. And so I'm banking on this integration also taking place there, right? That people start to speak of wellness endeavors, including, right, many of the things that we as DEI practitioners speak about in terms of building and influencing corporate culture. The second thing is the trend toward kind of brand, right? And companies having to crystallize what their brand is and what they stand for and the commitments that they get behind as a way to, keep, well, I guess build, right, a customer platform, but also maintain customer loyalty and also attract the best talent, right? People are demanding to know what companies believe in. So we are obviously the purveyors of free speech, right? We publish content across the spectrum, literally across the spectrum. And so, people want to know, right? They want to know how we really think about that concept. And so my hope is, again, that this trend will also drive what we're trying to, put at the forefront in terms of DEI work, right? Knowing that the outside world is, and the inside, right, and our employees are becoming much more vocal about these aspects. And I think that can only help, right, us as DEI practitioners to get our work done. And I'd say finally, um, back to that concept of DEI being just good business practice, particularly when it comes to innovation. Right? Innovation is a buzzword that is not going to die. It is going to be around. And the ways that DEI can enhance innovation are limitless. And
Hmm.
so I hope that that trend will bring, DEI along with it. Um, I'm going to throw it out here first, but I've been doing a lot of thinking and now writing about the connection between wisdom and DEI and good business practice. And so I hope that everybody look out, because I'm going to start to throw some things out there. I want to see what you think about it. But that's what I'm talking about, right? This idea that people want to um, just get good at innovating, get good at understanding people, right? And understanding that that's great for business.
So yeah, and I'm sure you've seen the case study. I mean, Harvard Business Review did a case study specifically on the effects of D and I on innovation
Yeah,
departments within large companies, and it was um, all net positive, right? And
yeah,
again, not just focused on the diversity that we may think about that are seen right now as controversial. I mean, we're talking age, ability,
yeah.
like across all of the different characteristics when we think about diversity, that it improved innovation department outcomes across the board.
And very starkly positive,
Right,
you know?
right.
I mean, it even surprised me, even though I feel like I know that to be true in my heart of hearts. Like, to see it on paper, it's pretty astonishing and powerful.
Agreed. And believe it or not, we're coming up on our last question here, and I
Okay.
wanted to make sure to get to our audience question. This is someone earlier. in their career who got to take a look at your profile prior to you joining, and they're asking, Kimberly, with such a varied career, what advice would you give to someone looking to make a similar impact in their field, especially looking at combining creative pursuits with strategic business roles?
I'm going to be very straight to the point and say always stay true to your own values and then
Mm,
use your voice to articulate them, no matter where you find yourself. And I mean that in the broadest sense. No matter what company you find yourself working for, no matter, the colleagues you find yourself surrounded by, and also no matter the role that you're in. Um, Stay true to those values and then pursue ways to make sure that those values are present where you are.
I love that advice, and it's a great place to end. Kimberly, thank you so much for sharing your journey and hearing about the impactful work that you're doing at Penguin Random House. For people that want to connect with you, and I know you mentioned you're going to be publishing some work that you're
Yeah.
doing. What's the best way to connect with you online?
LinkedIn, please. I feel like that's a way for me to kind of manage, and please give me grace there too.
Yeah,
But LinkedIn is a great way to interface on these topics. So I'll look
great.
forward to that. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll put your information once we publish. Thank you again. Thank you to all our listeners for tuning into the New Mainstream podcast. Until next time. Thanks to everyone listening in. To get more multicultural insights, check us out at thinknow.com and follow us on social media. You can also subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform.